Hello and welcome back to McClaren Performance. Ange Postecoglou is doing pretty well at Tottenham Hotspur at the moment, doing pretty well in the league. But who is Ange and what is Ange-Ball? As soon as any manager really pops up in the Premier League, I'm suddenly straight away really interested in who they are and what they've done, because there's usually quite a good reason as to why they've suddenly come up into the Premier League, and that's really no exception with Ange either. So I always wanted to do my research on him, but then he had a really good start in the Premier League also. 10 points from a possible 12, only drawing one game, playing what seems to be really attractive attacking football also. Naturally, there's been a lot of media attention around him. I've become a bit more interested in myself, and it's a really interesting person to talk about, especially a really complicated journey getting into the position that he is now. But I think primarily and straight away the most interesting thing is the way of playing that Tottenham have got at the moment under Ange. Very attacking, it's very dynamic. I think from what I can see, the manager gives the players a lot of freedom to fill the spaces they need to fill, to be creative in what they're doing on the pitch, and at the same time have a tactical understanding of the system that they're trying to play. Something really interesting to talk about, the opposite ends of that, giving players that freedom to play football or having them in a set structure, have to stay in certain spaces and do a certain specific job all the time. And seems to fit somewhere in the middle of that, because yes, while he has them free flowing, being able to do whatever they want, there is a clear system also within that that allows them to push forward without being too threatened at the back either. And when I read about it, it all sounds really complicated, but I think it's kind of simple. At the end of the day, they have inverted fullbacks. Fullbacks invert, the number 8s go forward also, so when they are attacking, they are in a 2-3-5 formation. They'll start in a 4-3-3. When they go to attack, the fullbacks will come forward, Basuma will drop backwards, Madison and players like that can then fill the spaces going forward, and you can have an overload of players in attack. And what I find really interesting learning about it is that, and learning myself really about tactics in football, every manager really, especially with a good football team, wants to find creative ways to get more players going forward, to have an overload of players going up front so you have better chances of scoring, while at the same time also protecting behind you. And in this case, for example, having fullbacks that can cover lots of areas of the pitch and be both forward and back and cover when they need to defend also. Ange-Ball is really that. It's a very specific way of doing that in a way that it creates a lot of diamond shapes within that formation. So a lot of cutting passes going through all the time. Very dynamic, very forward. You can see that really in the way they play. Just watching the highlights really between Spurs and Burnley where that finished 5-2. You can see that in a lot of the play. You can also see them scoring from having a very high press and being very dynamic off the ball, which really I don't think is unique to Ange-Ball. I think that's really something that a lot of teams do now, especially Newcastle at the moment. Pressing, very intense off the ball, win the ball back as fast as possible. Really, that is just total football and how that's been for quite a while anyway. I think what is probably more interesting than the actual football that Tottenham play is really how quickly Ange has kind of implemented that style of football. When I talk about psychology, and when I work with coaches and managers and working with psychology and implementing new tactics also, there is a transition to it in which players have to feel confidence in what the manager is talking about and learn to just implement what the manager wants them to implement in high pressure situations. And what you have to give Ange a lot of credit for is that he has seemed to implement this way of playing very, very quickly, especially coming into a club that, I mean, only a few months ago was classed as being in turmoil, really, with no manager wanting to go at all. Also, Harry Kane leaving, inevitably leaving, and I think any manager coming in probably knew that was going to happen. So, taking that chance, implementing his way of playing so quickly is very impressive. But then when you look at the history of Ange Postecoglou, it's kind of obvious that, yeah, he is the right man for this job. He's been to so many different clubs before, and he has transformed those teams, especially when it comes to transfers. Has got lots of different players in, lots of different players out, and made the changes that are necessary for him. He has done that many, many times. So coming and doing that at Tottenham, even though it is a high level, he is really perfectly suited for this job right now. When I talk about how quickly this style of play is implemented into a club also, I do have to talk about what seems like a very personable manager in Ange, someone who is very engaging with the players, very good at motivating, essentially a very good man manager. And from what I can see, talks that he gives on YouTube, which obviously isn't the fantastic insight that it should be, it is clear to see though that he is someone who's very characteristic. He's certainly made Tottenham more popular in what his style of football he's playing and the character that he is. And I can only imagine he's also popular amongst the players. Also, the one thing in my mind I remember watching was his introduction of Son as captain and talking to the rest of the players. And he seemed really engaging in those moments, despite being really not traditionally around the Europe area, being from Australia. I think the first Australian manager in the Premier League. He seems to have that engagement and that respect from the players, which, like I say, goes a massive way to implement a system very quickly and to start winning games very quickly also. Like I said, at most clubs that he's been at before, he has a reputation for getting rid of the players that need to be get rid of, really, and brings in the players that are necessary for his system, for the way that he wants to play, which is this system that he's now playing at Tottenham, which I believe has been adapted over the many clubs that he's been at to get to this point. That is what he does. And with the case of Harry Kane, again, that was probably a natural transition for Harry Kane to make, but he's been able to still implement what he needs to implement and get the correct players in for himself to do what he wants to do. I think some people are surprised, I think a lot of people are surprised, that Spurs seem to be doing better without Harry Kane than as opposed to what they were doing before. He didn't win the Golden Boot, obviously Erling Haaland won that, but he did score a lot of goals. But when it comes to big stars and teams performing, the example I always go back to is one from basketball with Michael Jordan, Phil Jackson, the Chicago Bulls. A star in Michael Jordan coming through at a young age at the time, really being the star of the Bulls before Phil Jackson became the manager of that team. The whole team really revolved around him, with Michael Jordan really being allowed to do whatever he wanted, and everyone just kind of watched on the team as he did what he did. And with that, yeah, fantastic statistics individually, but the team as a whole did not win. With Phil Jackson, he introduced the triangle system, really got everybody playing as a team. Everyone moved together, passed together, and, well, you know the success of Chicago Bulls. That's what happened. And in this case, yes, it's not a Michael Jordan that's staying, but there's a Harry Kane who has left, and a team that seems to be playing more with a system and seems to be smarter in what it wants to do as opposed to what the club as a whole has done before in bringing in Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte, and trying to force a winning mentality onto a team to make them into a big club, which in some ways Tottenham Hotspur just really aren't that. They are, and what they need to be is a much smarter team in terms of their recruitment and the system that they play, a manager that can promote and develop younger players also, and that's what they've got in Ange Postecoglou. And yes, it's working in the short term, and that's fantastic. The question now really is it going to carry on that way? And that is a question that I don't think anyone can really answer yet. All we can see is that there is a very competent manager in that position, and that gives you a very good chance going forward. And that leads me on to another topic when it comes to this conversation, and that is, for me at least, the rise of the managers that do not have this illustrious playing career. The likes of Roberto De Zerbi, probably Graham Potter, really to a certain extent, Ange Postecoglou right now. Also, managers that are being brought up into the Premier League from really almost unexpected places. I don't think a manager like Ange would be hired maybe 5-10 years ago for a top 6 club. I think there is a shift in the way that clubs are working, with the likes of Brighton and Brentford and Newcastle and Tottenham really now to a certain extent, also prioritising a system and then finding a manager to fit in with that. And don't get me wrong, with Spurs, they were kind of forced into that decision. No manager, at least it looked like no manager really wanted to go to that club with the turmoil that we're in. They were forced into making this decision, but it really is the right one. So hopefully it goes in a good way going forward. It seems like smart recruitment in both manager and players is being more advantageous than just hiring the biggest names possible. And I think a lot of clubs are learning that lesson and are somewhat going forward into working like a Brighton and a Brentford, maybe not to the extent of which they are data and analytics, but being more aware of how they play and how they want a manager to fit into that, or a manager to fit into whatever situation they currently are in. Tottenham really is a great example of that, thinking they needed that big manager to help them win, to help them become a big club. But what will help them do that is if they are smart in what they do with their process and how they play and how they recruit their players, regardless of how much money they have or don't have. So yeah, I guess in summary, Ange-Ball is this very dynamic, very forward-playing type of football that uses inverted fullbacks, have number 8s that push forward also, that allows for that 2-3-5 formation going forward, overloading players going forward, and yeah, it's very difficult for opposition teams to manage, and that is executed by a manager who is very engaging and can communicate that really quickly to a group of players, very quickly get the players in that he wants, get the players out that he doesn't want, and yeah, really quickly implement what he wants to do, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. Will it continue? That is a great question. There are other teams that are probably going to catch up, but a good style of football and a long period of time can only really mean success for Spurs. Thank you for watching and listening. Let me know what you think of Ange-Ball and what you think of my thoughts on all of those things, and yeah, I'll see you again some other time.